What does it take to break a mountain built to hide a nuclear program from the entire world? For over a decade, one place in Iran was considered untouchable. Then, in a single night, that idea was tested. And nobody, not even the people who built the mountain, knew exactly what would happen next. Before we go further, if stories like this keep you thinking long after they end, hit that subscribe button right now. It costs nothing, but it tells me you want more of this. Tap like if you're curious where this is going, and if you know someone who loves real history explained without the noise, send this to them before you forget. Let's go back to the beginning, because you can't understand what happened at Fordow without understanding why it was built in the first place. Iran's relationship with nuclear technology didn't start with secrecy. Decades ago, before the 1979 revolution, Iran actually worked with Western countries on nuclear energy projects. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't controversial in the way it later became. But everything changed after the revolution. The government changed, the alliances changed, and the trust between Iran and the West collapsed almost overnight. What didn't change was the belief held by Iranian leaders that nuclear capability meant power on the world stage. Whether the goal was purely energy, national pride, deterrence, or something more serious, the program kept moving forward, year after year, government after government. And that's where the disagreement started. Iran always insisted its nuclear work was peaceful, meant for energy and research, and fully within its rights as a nation. But outside observers, especially in Washington, Tel Aviv, and European capitals, watched certain parts of that program with growing suspicion. Enrichment levels rose, facilities appeared that weren't always declared right away. Inspectors asked questions that didn't always get clear answers. Sanctions came, negotiations came. A landmark deal was signed in 2015, meant to freeze the program in exchange for economic relief. For a while, it seemed to work. Then, in 2018, the United States walked away from that agreement. Iran, in response, slowly walked back its own commitments. Enrichment increased again. Stockpiles grew. And one number in particular became impossible to ignore. Uranium enriched to 60% purity. That's far above what a civilian power reactor actually needs, and uncomfortably close to weapons-grade material. It didn't prove Iran was building a bomb, but it meant the gap between civilian program and weapons capability had gotten dangerously thin. Now, somewhere in the middle of all this tension, a facility appeared that would eventually become the center of the entire story. Fordow. Fordow wasn't announced with pride. It was exposed. In 2009, Western intelligence agencies revealed its existence to the world, and the location alone told you everything about its purpose. It sat inside a mountain near the city of Qom, with key sections buried somewhere between 80 and 90 meters underground. That's not a basement. That's not a bunker under a building. That's a facility dug so deep into solid rock that ordinary bombs simply couldn't reach it. Think about that decision for a moment. You don't bury a factory that deep unless you're planning for the day someone tries to destroy it. Every meter of rock above Fordow wasn't just geology, it was a message. It said, go ahead and try. And here's what made that mountain so effective as a shield. Inside Fordow were centrifuges, long, thin machines that spin at extraordinary speeds to separate and enrich uranium. From the outside, you might imagine these as tough, industrial, practically indestructible. The truth is the opposite. Centrifuges are some of the most delicate machines humans build. They spin so fast that even a tiny vibration can throw them off balance. A sudden loss of power can damage them. A shock wave, even a small one, can destroy entire rows of them in seconds. So a room full of centrifuges isn't like a warehouse full of steel machinery. It's closer to a room full of glass instruments, all spinning at once, all vulnerable to the smallest disturbance. That fragility is exactly why the mountain mattered so much. The rock wasn't just a wall, it was the entire defense strategy. If nothing could reach the centrifuges, nothing could stop them from spinning. For years, that strategy worked. Fordow became something close to a myth, the place that couldn't be touched no matter how advanced your air force was. But myths eventually get tested, and Israel, more than any other country, had spent years trying to figure out how to test this one. Israeli leaders viewed Iran's nuclear ambitions as a direct threat to their country's existence. Their air force was capable, modern, and battle-tested. They had struck nuclear-related targets before in other countries, decades earlier. But Fordow was different. You couldn't just drop a bomb on top of it and call it done. A surface explosion, no matter how dramatic it looked on camera, wouldn't touch machines buried nearly 100 meters below solid rock. To actually damage what was inside, a weapon needed to punch through that rock first, survive the impact, and still function well enough to detonate in exactly the right place. That's an incredibly difficult engineering problem. It's not just about how big your bomb is. It's about precision, structural design, timing, and knowledge of the ground itself, how the rock behaves, where the tunnels run, where the air shafts sit, where the weak points might be hiding. This is where a very specific weapon enters the story: the GBU-57, also known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. It's roughly 20 feet long and weighs around 30,000 pounds. It exists for one job only: to smash through hardened, deeply buried targets that regular bombs can't touch. It's so heavy and so specialized that only one aircraft in the world can carry it into combat: the B-2 stealth bomber. Let that sink in for a second. An entire weapon in an entire aircraft program built around the idea that somewhere out there, a target like Fordow might one day need to be reached. Even with a weapon like that, experts had long warned that a single strike probably wouldn't be enough. Fordow was too deep, too reinforced, too carefully designed. Real damage would likely require multiple precise hits on the most critical points, not to flatten the mountain, but to collapse the systems that kept it functioning. Because here's the thing people often forget about underground facilities. No matter how deep you build, you still need air. You still need power. You still need entrances for people and equipment to move in and out. You still need a way to cool machines, remove waste, and keep the whole complex alive. Every one of those connections is a potential weakness. And the deeper a facility goes, the more it depends on a small number of these lifelines. Once an enemy studies those lifelines closely enough, for long enough, the mountain stops being a total mystery. It starts becoming something closer to a map. That kind of study isn't dramatic. There's no music playing while it happens. It's quiet, patient work. Analysts comparing satellite images year after year, engineers modeling how shockwaves travel through different types of rock, intelligence officers tracking trucks, equipment, and construction near entrances. It's slow, it's invisible to the public, but it's exactly the kind of work that eventually turns an impossible target into a difficult but achievable one. And in Fordow's case, that patient study had been going on for years, long before anyone pulled a trigger. If you've made it this far, that tells me you actually care about understanding the full picture, not just the headline. So, do me a quick favor. Drop a comment with one word that describes how you're feeling about this story so far. It helps me know you're really here, and it helps this video reach more people who'd enjoy it too. By the middle of 2025, the tension around Iran's nuclear program had reached a breaking point. The old restrictions from the 2015 deal were long gone. Enrichment levels kept climbing. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the group responsible for monitoring nuclear activity worldwide, had tracked a stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% that had grown to more than 400 kilograms. That number alone doesn't prove a bomb was being built, but it meant the timeline for a potential weapon, if that path was ever chosen, had gotten dangerously short. And Fordow sat right at the center of that danger because it was Iran's main site for producing uranium at that enrichment level. As long as Fordow kept spinning, buried safely under its mountain, every diplomatic conversation happening in Vienna or Washington or Tel Aviv was happening in the shadow of a facility that seemed beyond military reach. That shadow gave Iran leverage, and it gave everyone else a growing sense of urgency. In the weeks leading up to the strike, signs started appearing that Iran suspected something was coming. Satellite images picked up unusual activity near Fordow's entrances. Trucks moved in and out. Some analysts believed certain entrances were being covered with additional earth and rock, possibly as emergency reinforcement, possibly to hide movement of material. Nobody outside a small circle knew for certain. But one thing was clear to everyone watching. The mountain wasn't sleeping anymore. Then, in June 2025, the answer came. The United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer, a coordinated strike against 3 of Iran's most important nuclear sites: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. According to officials, the operation involved around 125 aircraft, including 7 B-2 stealth bombers flying an extraordinarily long mission, supported by refueling planes and fighter escorts. A submarine also launched a wave of Tomahawk cruise missiles toward Isfahan. In total, roughly 75 precision-guided weapons were used across the 3 sites, including 14 of the massive GBU-57 bunker-buster bombs, 6 of which were reportedly aimed directly at Fordow. This wasn't a single dramatic dash across enemy territory. It was the result of years of planning compressed into a few hours. Stealth routing, precise timing, complex refueling logistics, and a level of coordination that very few militaries on Earth could actually execute. And the stakes were enormous. Any strike on Iranian nuclear facilities carried the risk of a much wider war. Iran could retaliate against American bases in the region, against allies, against shipping routes that the global economy depends on. There was a real chance the strike could backfire completely, uniting the Iranian public behind their government instead of weakening it. There was also a chance it simply wouldn't work, that the mountain would hold, and the myth of the untouchable fortress would only grow stronger. So this wasn't just a military operation. It was one of the biggest political gambles in recent memory. When the bombs hit, the visible results were dramatic. Satellite images afterward showed disturbed Earth, blocked or collapsed entrances, and changes along the ridgeline above the underground complex. American officials described the operation as a major success. President Trump publicly used the word obliterated to describe the damage. Other officials spoke of severe disruption to Iran's enrichment capability. But here's where the story gets complicated, and honestly, more interesting than any headline could capture. Nobody could actually see inside the mountain. Now, before we go deeper into what happened after the bombs fell, take a second and hit that like button if this kind of grounded, no-hype breakdown is what you come here for. It genuinely helps this video get shown to more people who'd rather understand a story than just react to it. Unlike a target sitting out in the open, where damage can be measured almost immediately through photos and video, Fordow's most important sections were buried under dozens of meters of solid rock. You couldn't count destroyed buildings. You couldn't measure a crater and know what it meant for the machines below. The most critical evidence, the actual state of the centrifuges, the tunnels, the enriched material, was hidden exactly where it had always been hidden, out of sight. The IAEA later confirmed that all three sites, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, had been struck. But the agency also admitted something important. The true extent of the damage underground at Fordow could not be confirmed with full certainty, precisely because of how deep the facility was buried and the nature of the weapons used against it. That single admission opened the door to two very different stories running side by side. On one side, strong claims of victory, officials describing the strike as historic, unprecedented, and devastating to Iran's nuclear ambitions. On the other side, early intelligence assessments, some reported with low confidence by various outlets, suggesting the strikes may have set the program back by months rather than destroying it permanently. Some analysts raised a troubling possibility that Iran may have moved some of its enriched uranium stockpile out of Fordow before the strike ever happened, anticipating exactly this kind of attack. If that's true, then the story shifts. A badly damaged facility is one problem. Missing, unaccounted for nuclear material is a completely different and, in many ways, more dangerous one. Here's the thing about phrases like total destruction in a story like this. They're almost always too simple for what actually happened. A nuclear program isn't one building or one room. It's a network. It includes machines, yes, but also stockpiles of material, scientific knowledge inside people's heads, supply chains for parts and materials, storage sites scattered elsewhere, and the political will to keep going. You can badly damage one piece of that network, even the most important piece, without erasing the whole thing. At the same time, that doesn't mean the strike was small or symbolic. Arms control experts pointed out that centrifuges don't need to be hit directly to be destroyed. Shockwaves, vibration, sudden loss of power, contamination, structural collapse. Any of these can ruin delicate spinning machines that rely on near-perfect balance to function. So even without a clean, visible kill shot, the internal damage from 6 massive bunker buster bombs hitting the mountain above Fordow was almost certainly severe. The honest answer, the one that doesn't make for a dramatic headline, is that both things were probably true at once. The strike may have been one of the most technically successful bunker-busting operations in modern military history, and it may still not have been the final word on Iran's nuclear ambitions. That's not a contradiction. That's just how real strategic outcomes tend to work. They rarely fit neatly into total victory or total failure. Let's step back for a moment and think about what this operation actually revealed beyond the immediate damage report. For years, Fordow represented an idea, the belief that if you bury something deep enough, hide it well enough, and reinforce it strongly enough, it becomes untouchable. That idea shaped how Iran planned its nuclear program. It shaped how Israel planned its military doctrine. It shaped how the United States designed an entire generation of specialized weapons, built for exactly this kind of problem. Once that idea gets tested and even partially broken, something changes that goes beyond the physical damage. It becomes psychological. If you were an engineer who helped design Fordow, or a scientist who trusted that mountain to protect your life's work, the strike told you something you probably didn't want to hear. The protection you believed in wasn't as absolute as you thought, and that changes calculations on every side. For Iran, the lesson might be to disperse capability even further, build smaller facilities in more locations, move material more frequently, reduce transparency even more than before, and make future targets harder to study and harder to find. For the United States and its allies, the lesson might be that even a technically brilliant strike doesn't guarantee a lasting solution. If the target adapts and learns from what just happened, the next version of this problem could be even more difficult to solve. This is really the paradox sitting at the center of bunker warfare, and honestly, at the center of most arms races throughout history. The better one side gets at breaking hidden fortresses, the more motivation the other side has to build a different kind of hidden fortress. Walls felt permanent until artillery evolved past them. Armor felt dominant until precision weapons caught up. Bunkers felt secure until the right combination of intelligence, patience, and specialized engineering caught up too. Every defense, eventually, creates the conditions for the next offense. If this kind of deeper analysis is exactly why you keep coming back to videos like this, do me a favor and share this one with a friend who actually enjoys thinking about these things instead of just skimming headlines. It really does make a difference, and it costs you nothing but 10 seconds. There's another layer to this story that often gets buried underneath the drama of explosions and stealth bombers, and it's worth pulling out into the light. Fordow wasn't just dangerous because of what sat inside it. It was dangerous because of what it represented to completely different audiences, all watching the same mountain and seeing something different. To Israeli leaders, Fordow was proof that Iran wanted a protected path toward weapons-relevant enrichment, safely tucked away from conventional threats. To Iranian leaders, it was proof that their country needed to prepare for attack because attack always felt like a real possibility, given decades of sanctions, sabotage, and regional conflict. To American policymakers, it represented the hardest, most stubborn piece of a nuclear puzzle that diplomacy had tried and failed to fully solve for more than a decade. So when those bombs finally hit the mountain, they weren't just striking a tunnel system carved into rock. They were colliding with years of accumulated fear, suspicion, and unresolved history on every side. Iran's leaders have spent decades living under sanctions and threats. Israel's leaders have spent decades warning that an Iranian weapon would reshape the entire region in ways they couldn't accept. American leaders have spent decades trying to prevent nuclear proliferation while also trying to avoid dragging their country into another prolonged war in the Middle East. Everyone involved genuinely believes they're preventing disaster. That's exactly what makes situations like this so difficult to resolve. Nobody sees themselves as the aggressor, even when they're the one pulling the trigger. Now, let's talk about what came next, because the aftermath of Operation Midnight Hammer raised questions that go far beyond Iran's borders. Around the world, governments spend enormous resources protecting their most valuable strategic assets. Some bury them underground, just like Fordow. Some reinforce them with thick layers of concrete and steel. Some scatter capability across multiple smaller locations instead of concentrating it in one place. Some rely on secrecy and ambiguity rather than physical hardening. Fordow had become one of the most famous real-world examples of the go deep, stay hidden strategy. If that strategy just proved to be less reliable than everyone assumed, military planners in dozens of countries are almost certainly rethinking their own assumptions right now. That doesn't mean underground facilities suddenly became useless. Depth still matters, reinforcement still matters, hardening still matters enormously, but the lesson has gotten sharper and a little more uncomfortable. Protection was never absolute. It never really is. Every fortress, no matter how clever its design, creates its own internal logic, its own entrances, its own dependencies, its own vulnerabilities. And given enough time, enough intelligence, and enough patience, that logic can eventually be studied, mapped, and challenged. There's also the question of verification, which honestly might matter more in the long run than the physical damage itself. Before the strikes, inspectors had confirmed Iran held a stockpile of more than 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. After the strikes, one of the most urgent questions wasn't just about the condition of the buildings. It was about where that material actually was, and whether inspectors could still confirm its location and status. If some of that material had already been moved before the attack, the picture becomes far more complicated than a simple damage assessment. A destroyed building is something you can eventually rebuild or replace. Unaccounted for enriched material is a completely different kind of problem, one that doesn't show up clearly in satellite photos and doesn't get resolved just because a mountain got hit. So the world was left holding two realities at the same time. First, the United States had proven, in a very public and very deliberate way, that even Fordow could be reached by a precisely tailored conventional strike. Second, real uncertainty remained about how much of Iran's broader nuclear capability and how much of its material stockpile had actually been eliminated. That gap between dramatic action and incomplete certainty is honestly one of the defining features of modern conflict. It's uncomfortable because we're used to stories having clear endings, but real strategic events rarely wrap up that neatly. So did the strike actually make the region safer? Reasonable people land in different places on that question, and it's worth hearing both sides honestly instead of picking one and pretending it's obvious. Supporters of the strike argue that a critical enrichment site was badly damaged, that Iran's confidence in its own security took a real hit, and that the myth of an untouchable underground sanctuary is now permanently broken. They'd argue that waiting even longer would only have let the program advance further, and that deterrence means very little if a country is never actually willing to use the tools it built. Critics respond more cautiously. They point out that military force can delay a nuclear program without ever resolving the underlying motives that drove it in the first place. Bombing a facility doesn't erase the scientific knowledge already sitting in the minds of the engineers who built it. It doesn't rebuild trust between adversaries. And if a country concludes that only an actual nuclear weapon can protect it from future strikes like this one, then military force might buy short-term time, while quietly increasing long-term danger. Both of these arguments carry real weight, And that's exactly why this story doesn't come with a tidy conclusion. Quick pause here. If you've stayed with the story this far, you clearly want the full picture, not just the exciting parts. So subscribe now if you haven't already, because this channel is built for exactly this kind of patient, honest breakdown, and I've got more stories like this one coming. Let's bring this back to the original question we started with. Can you actually protect something by burying it deep enough inside a mountain? For years, the answer seemed to be yes. Fordow was the proof. It sat there, buried under nearly 90 meters of solid rock. Spinning centrifuges that produced uranium enriched far beyond ordinary civilian needs, and no one could reliably touch it. That reputation alone gave Iran enormous strategic leverage in every negotiation, every standoff, every diplomatic conversation for over a decade. Operation Midnight Hammer didn't erase every uncertainty surrounding that question. Nobody can honestly claim it did, not even the people who planned and executed it. But it did erase the most comforting version of the answer. No fortress is untouchable simply because it's buried. No mountain offers a perfect, permanent promise of safety. And no secret stays hidden forever once a determined, well-resourced adversary decides that finding it is worth the time. Think about what actually made this strike possible. It wasn't just the size of the bombs, even though 30,000 pounds is genuinely staggering. It wasn't just the stealth of the B-2 bombers, even though flying that mission successfully required extraordinary skill and planning. The real foundation of this entire operation was years, honestly over a decade, of quiet, patient study. Analysts comparing satellite images year after year. Engineers modeling how shockwaves move through different types of rock. Intelligence officers tracking trucks, construction, and equipment near entrances that most people would never think twice about. That's the part of this story that rarely makes it into dramatic headlines, but it might be the most important part of all. Fordow wasn't defeated by a single night of bombing. It was defeated by an enemy that refused to stop paying attention year after year, long after most people had forgotten the mountain even existed. And that leaves us with something bigger than just one strike on one facility in one country. Every state that hides critical capability underground, whether it's a nuclear program, a military command center, or something else entirely, is essentially betting that depth and secrecy will outlast the patience of everyone trying to find it. Sometimes that bet pays off for decades. But patience, especially the kind backed by billions of dollars, advanced satellites, and specialized weapons built for exactly one purpose, has a way of eventually winning. The strike on Fordow didn't just damage tunnels and centrifuges, it changed the meaning of the mountain itself. Fordow stopped being the place nobody could reach. It became the clearest modern proof of how far a determined nation will go when depth, fear, time, and nuclear ambition all collide in one place. And somewhere, right now, in some other country, on some other continent, a different set of planners is almost certainly staring at their own protected facility, buried under their own mountain or their own layers of concrete, asking a much colder question than they used to ask. Is this really protection? Or is it just the next problem, quietly waiting for someone patient enough to solve it? That question doesn't have a clean answer yet. Maybe it never will. But it's the question every nuclear power on Earth is sitting with tonight, whether they say it out loud or not. If this story gave you a clearer picture of what actually happened at Fordow and why it matters far beyond Iran's borders, that's exactly what this channel is here for. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, drop a like if this earned it, and share it with someone who'd rather understand the world than just scroll past it.